So, and now can I welcome Emma and Lizzie? Thank you so much for joining us. And perhaps if we could start off for both of you to kind of introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your journey into company secretary roles. Do you want to start us off, Emma?
Yeah, okay, thanks, Amy. I think probably for me, the term is organic. It all came about very organically. I began as a school governing board clerk in maintained primary schools predominantly, and the role just really grew from there. I think probably because of my own interest in it, really. I think, for want of a better phrase, being a governance geek, just absolutely loving sort of digging into the detail and the nitty-gritty of it, and kept hearing other people in the sector saying, you know, oh, it's really grey, governance is really grey. And actually I was like, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the interpretation's grey, but I think the guidance is quite black and white. And so worked my way up through, got my clerking qualification, and then joined a national multi-academy trust as their governance lead, and then moved on from there to another academy trust where I'm the head of governance and compliance. I'm not actually, which is quite common, I've found, the named company secretary for the academy trust. I think historically, due to poor understanding of the role, it's sat elsewhere, but that is something that we're looking to bring into my role. But I certainly am the company secretary.
That's great, thank you. And Lizzie, if you could give us a little bit of information about yourself and how you came into your role as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. So my route, bit of a tangential one through, but I started in a research consultancy role, specialising in education and skills, and more and more over the years that became focused on education research, informing research that went through to the DFE around teacher workload, retention and recruitment, flexible working, well-being, those sorts of things. And as part of those research projects, I thought the more and more it became education focused rather than the skills, I very much thought I need a tangible connection with school life as well. And I was ruminating on all of that, and happened to see an advert to become part of a local authority clerking service. I thought, well, it fit round my circumstances at the time, it would fit around my research. So that was how I started. I started clerking in a wide range of different settings, and ended up with, alongside the full-time job, I was supporting 7 or 8 schools, and it sort of started to take over as governance does. Some of those schools were part of the trust that I'm now the director of governance for. I was recruited to become specifically the clerk to the boards to begin with, and to work directly with the trustees. That has itself evolved over time. I'm now the director of governance, and as part of that role, the company secretary, I am the designated company secretary for the trust, and it's just within the role description that I have. So yeah, that's my routine.
That's great, thank you. And so obviously these roles have evolved. Peter, you must have seen lots of changes, but is there anything, firstly, from a change point of view that seems to be happening, but also anything that's remained the same, that's a sort of a fundamental part of the role that probably won't ever change?
The best bit of the role for me never changes, and that's minutes. It's managing those meetings. It's the art of creating minutes, because you know, I know you're recording this session, but anybody who, you know, sort of, oh well, I've got a recording and here's a transcript of it, there's your minutes. That's not board minutes. For me, writing board minutes is an art. I wouldn't say it's creative writing, because that perhaps gives the wrong message, but it sometimes is. Pulling back the discussion and making it sound as though your directors knew what they were talking about when they were having their boardroom discussion, even though there was a lengthy diversion onto some hobby horse of one director halfway through the conversation, but making sense of it all. I think that is really, really important. And actually, there's an increasing amount, and this is something that I don't know that it affects the education sector particularly at the moment, but I think it will, because I think what we see in governance in one sector tends to sort of seep out into other sectors. And we're seeing an increasing corpus of case law, which sort of demonstrates that the minutes say this. Therefore, yes, the directors did do what they were supposed to do. It's a different sector, I know, although I know some of you are sort of are charities as well. But anybody who read the High Court judgment on Kids Company will see the absolute priority that the judge put on the fact that, well, it's in the minutes. They must have discussed it. It's in the minutes. They did their job. I think that was really clear, and I think that for me demonstrated the importance of that aspect of our role. What I am seeing changing, I'm seeing a lot more young people coming into governance. I'm seeing a lot more people making a career of governance. If I say to you that our latest cohort, I mean, we sometimes talk about diversity and inclusion in business. The latest cohort of people we're seeing coming into the profession, we, if anything, have a diversity and inclusion issue in, shall we say, the direction that one wouldn't expect it. I think something like 75% of the latest intake I saw were female. It's fantastic. We're seeing a lot of people coming into the profession from ethnic minorities as well. So it's really important that we see that moving through. And that's why we're looking at sort of trying to create the opportunity for people to develop their career in governance and build a career in governance. Because I've enjoyed it.
Thank you. And so, Lizzie, if I can pose that question to you as well, is there anything that you've seen consistent throughout your journey into the role, and things that are changing or you're expecting to change?
I think Peter's put it brilliantly in terms of the minutes. Absolutely. And my hobby horse around minutes is very much, I often hear or see statements like, well, they're just taking the minutes, or they are just the clerk. And it's that word just that immediately devalues the role that person is having within that meeting space. And absolutely, in the education sector, decisions stand and fall by what was in those minutes, and the ENSING particularly. Ofsted inspections, they will absolutely review the minutes. They need to see evidence of that governor challenge within them. So it's never just the minutes. That's not what you're doing. So consistency there. I think consistency in terms of just that advisory role and being there as a sounding board for people, that doesn't change. You're always doing that, even if sometimes it's lighter touch than others. In terms of the change for me specifically, I would say the complexities of trust governance, they certainly don't decrease. They're getting, there's always more to consider. I can't see that changing. So the ever-changing sort of evolving regulatory environment that we work in, and that's something that we have to stay on top of. And what that means is the governance structures within the trust, as the trust itself evolves and grows, the governance structures need to be able to grow and evolve with them as well, so that the right mechanisms are there and the right assurances are being fed through to the board. So I think it's that always being prepared to evolve structures. Once you've got, it's never just stuck, it's always moving on. So yeah, that's the change.
Thank you. Emma, is there anything? Oh, sorry, Peter.
Sorry,
yeah.
I was going to say, if I can throw in one thought from the chat, which is that Elizabeth said that the head of governance and company secretary and still receives emails about the CEO's diary. I just throw in a thought. I was talking to the company secretary of probably a FTSE 5 company. I better not name names, but you may well get their petrol. And he had received exactly the same sort of email from somebody that day, and it's fair to say they got a fairly dusty answer. So don't worry about it. It's not just you. Sorry, I cut across you there.
Thank you. No, that's fine. Have you anything to add to that, Emma, particularly maybe on changes from how the roles evolved?
I think generally it's difficult to talk about the role of company secretary as a standalone to the governance professional. It's all very much in one, isn't it? And I think certainly what we're seeing, and it was really interesting when we did the survey at the start of yesterday's session, about how many people are coming across working for MAPS directly. So I think we are starting to see that elevation of the role. What we really need now behind that is the networks and the training and the understanding to be able to develop it further, really. I think there's a greater, I can certainly see over time the greater emphasis on the company secretary role being about more than just the governance handbook. It you know, a lot more around company law, articles of association, regulators. There's a lot more coming into the role there that you really need to be very clear on. So I think the complexity of it is developing, but in a really interesting way that I think lends itself very well to that fact that we want to elevate the professionalism of the role. I think it's a really positive direction that it's going in.
That's great, thank you. Just thinking about CPD, because obviously that's come up quite a lot in the chat. Are there any areas of CPD that you particularly value that are perhaps ongoing and not necessarily qualification wise? And also, are there any qualifications and more formal methods of CPD that you've accessed that you've really gained a lot from and have really helped your role? Peter, would you like to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, I mean, shameless advertising from me.
Yeah.
But, you know, the Institute website has a lot of stuff about cross-sectoral governance. So, and if you're a member, if you're a subscriber to the magazine, that sort of thing, you'll find a lot of stuff in there that is actually CPD. I, as a corporate company secretary, would still read with interest articles about the charity secretary's perspective, education secretary's perspective, all kinds of perspectives, because they are different. And because they might give me good ideas which will help my board, and that was enormously useful sometimes. So I think there's stuff out there that you can do like that. I think just also creating your awareness that, and this is probably preaching to the choir, but because these people, you know, everybody's come to this conference, but creating your awareness that you are a governance professional and that is your job, and therefore taking an interest in articles in the paper, in the press generally, in information that you see that relates to that. And you know, I was struck again by something in the chat that Mel said about the role being, you know, sort of strategic governance. It needs to be highlighted, and one of the things that we try and encourage is that when there is training for directors, when there is training for chief executives in the corporate sector, a basic part, and I'm guessing you have this for your directors and your head teachers as well. In the corporate sector, a basic thing about it is, what are your director's duties? And there will be specific training given either by the company's secretary or by the company's lawyers about directors' duties and responsibilities. And an important part of that, I think, is raising their awareness of the role of their company secretary or governance professional. Yeah, I think that's just so important.
Yeah, definitely. Emma, is there anything that you've accessed that might not be directly governance related or school governance related in the way of qualifications that you've had that you've thought, actually, that was really useful grounding?
I have done the CGI certificate in companies. I think company secretary. I think I did it more in the general sense, because I think, like you say, governance is governance really. And for me, there's two aspects of being good in the role. One is understanding the what a company secretary actually is, and then the other one is understanding the legislation, the guidance that sits around wherever you're performing that role. But I think for me, it's really about making sure that you absolutely are clear on the legal structure within the Academy Trust. So it's more than just the company secretary role, how, you know, what you do on Companies House and so on and so forth, but it's about making sure that you understand the legal structure of an Academy Trust, how it works, you really understand those articles, and that you operate in a way that means that you can make them accessible. You know, they're full of jargon and quite difficult to interpret sometimes, but making them accessible to everyone on the board. So I think it's more than just company secretary training, and I think I'm a huge advocate for networking, you know, being part of as many networks as you can, and also making sure that you make the best of the legal advice that you should access as an Academy Trust. We have procured legal partner, and so it's not being afraid to pick up the phone and speak to someone and ask that advice from a legal perspective as well. You know, I'm day's a school day, every day is an opportunity to learn something new, so I think it's just tap into whatever is out there. But as Peter said, it's keeping networked in and making sure you've got those alerts and you're picking up information, because what we're picking up is trends and best practice, pitfalls to avoid. It's quite broad really, isn't it, more so than classroom based courses and learning.
Thank you. And Lizzie, have you got anything from your experience that you can add to the CPD conversation?
Yeah, I think everything that Emma said, I think particularly around the professional networks, for me, they've been absolutely invaluable, to speak to other people who are actually in the role and understand the differences that the role can have across, you know, different trusts, but also the complexities of it, and being able to share ideas of how you've maybe solved a problem or a challenge. Just being able to actually talk to others is brilliant. I am currently doing the chartered qualifying scheme through CGI. It is time consuming. I've seen comments around funding for that, but I have found that very, very valuable to do, drawing, as Peter said, on governance from different sectors. I know governance professionals in the NHS, and I find it really interesting to speak to them about how they go about things. So yeah, there's networks. And I think the other thing would be, that hasn't been mentioned, I don't think, being on boards or other types of groups yourself. So whether I chaired a research group for a long while, you bring actually a lot of that experience into your role, because you've understood what it's like to be on the other side of the table, I suppose. And also if you get the chance to clerk maybe challenging panels that maybe feel a little bit out of your comfort zone, I would encourage you to do it, because that's the way you learn. You learn every single time you do anything like a disciplinary panel or an exclusions panel. A really tricky complaint comes along, you learn something that you can transfer to your next experience every single time you do that. So those are all CPD as far as I'm concerned as well.
That's great.
Amy, can I pick
Yes,
up on that
please.
as well? Is in the first place, absolutely agree about networking groups. Yeah, it's so important to sometimes. Very often, the company secretary is a sole trader, in terms of, you know, you don't have a vast network of other people who do a very, very similar job in your organisation. Very often, you're the only one, and it's great if you happen to be in a big PLC with a team of 35, but actually most people aren't. So, you know, that's really, really important, is those networking groups, building up relationships with other people who do a similar job in your area. If you haven't got enough for that, another shameless plug, the Institute has branches. You don't have to be a member of the Institute to join a branch. Somebody was asking on the chat about the West Midlands, or yeah, absolutely, there's a West Midlands branch. So there's those opportunities. I think the really big thing about networking groups is you can talk to each other about your problems. I remember coming to this conference a couple of years ago, and the big issue that everybody seemed to be having was they'd got a shortage of potential governors. And you know, there were other people who were saying, oh, I've got this really good governor who's been on for 10 years, so they're having to drop off now. Well, talk to each other. If they've been really good for your school for 10 years, perhaps they'll be really good for somebody else's school for a bit. And the final thing I'll throw in there is that if you are short of a governor, and you have got a networking group of governor governance professional. Actually, governance professionals, in my experience, make pretty good non-executive directors. Not least because they'll always big you up in front of the CEO. But yeah, they actually understand governance, which is enormously important. So yeah, absolutely, networking.
Thank you, Peter. That's great. And yes, it is something that we've spoken about before, and still looking at as NGA to develop avenues for that. And I know social media has been mentioned in the chat as well. It really is a great area to be able to network and have that contact, even though you can't get together because of geographical differences. So I would certainly endorse that. So we're getting to the end of our session, but I think it'd be nice to hear what you like most about your job. What's the best thing? Lizzie, do you want to kick us off on that?
Not a single day is ever, I don't think a single minute is the same as the one that happened before. You just don't know. Yes, I've talked to the complexities of it, and that's increasing, and as trust evolve, but actually that's also the bit that I really like about it. It's a challenge, it changes, you have to stay on your toes, nothing ever stays still, and you're always learning, and you meet some amazing people. I am humbled and awed by the governors, the trustees, the members in our schools who give up so much time to support our children and young people. They are an absolute privilege to serve in their, to help them support their roles. So for me, that's some of the best bits of the job.
Thank you. Emma, is there anything you would add to that you particularly find a good thing about your job?
I think I would say the same. It's that no 2 days are the same, and I think that makes for a really interesting job. We are very, very lucky to have relationships across the organisation, and to really feel it's quite a privileged position to feel that you have that oversight of so much of the organisation, when so many people quite often work in silos and they're very focused on a particular area. We have a really really interesting breadth of knowledge across the whole of the organisation, and I think for me it's that I don't feel like I ever stop learning. I'm constantly learning. There's always more I can read, I can hear about, I can network into. So I find that really sort of feeds that passion and that drive to want to do the very best that I can, is feeling that every day I'm giving something, I'm taking something from it as well, which is really great.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And Peter, is there anything that you can share with us?
I'll second both of those. I mean, it is a job where you are across the whole business. You have a helicopter view, and you don't know what you're going to be doing when you come into the office that day. Most days, there will always be something happen unexpectedly. And yeah, sometimes that's a real nuisance because you were really planning on doing something completely different, and suddenly you've got to sort out some issue that has blown up. So yeah, absolutely, that's important. I think the breadth of the profession is such that if you are that person who likes just taking the minutes and sitting quietly in a corner, there's a place for you in it. If you are that person who wants to grow your career and spend a career, sort of developing that strategic approach, there absolutely is a profession for you. And I think if the thing that I'm actually trying to encourage people with at the moment very often is around the fact that you can, as a governance professional in education, and I probably shouldn't say this to this group, but as a governance professional in education, there are opportunities in other sectors. And similarly, there will be governance professionals in other sectors who are looking lasciviously at opportunities in academy trusts, for example. And bear in mind, it can be a broader profession if you want it to be. Equally, you can specialize. I know some people who specialize in financial services and won't do anything other than financial services. Fine, that's their choice. But I think it's a lot broader than that, and you can do it. And I think the final point echoes what both Emma and Lizzie have been saying. is the quality of people that you meet. I mean, I've been privileged to sit in some very big corporate boardrooms with some very big hitters in terms of in terms of directors, and being able to see them. Sometimes they don't know the answer either, and that's actually quite empowering for you. But sort of seeing those people and actually building a relationship with some really smart, sort of turned on people is a fantastic opportunity, particularly as you tend to do it as a governance professional very often at a relatively early stage of your career compared with some other individuals.
That's great. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us and for your insights. It's so valuable, and I think everybody has got something from the conversation. So thank you very much.